Mm, Hare Krishna. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
Prabhu.
Prabhu.
And my screen is visible, right?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. So we'll start with the Mangala Charan. Om Madhyana Chimantasya, Jnananjana Shalakaya, Chakurmiltamena Tasmai Sri Guraya Namah, Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale, Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam, Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Udapatakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha, Sri Rupam Sagjatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Stam Sajivam, Sadvaitam Savdutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam, Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishakan Vitamscha, हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपति गोपेशा गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमस्ते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये पंचाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय हरे कृष्णा. So today we'll continue with verse 36 from chapter 11 canto 1. This is meter 14. Uddama bhava pishunamala valguhasa Vridavaloka madano piyasam Sammuya chapamajahat pramadottamasta Yasyendriyam vimatitum Kuhakair nasheku Uddama bhava pishunama lavalguhasa Vridavaloka madano piyasam Sammuya chapamajahat pramadottamasta Yasyendriyam vimatitum Kuekir Nasheku Uddama Bhava Pishunama Lavalguhasa Vidavaloka Niyato Madano Piyasam Sammuya Chapamajahat Pramadottamasta Yasyendriyam Vimatitum Kuhakir Nasheku Uddama Bhava Pishunama Lavalguhasa Vidavaloka Niyato Madano Piyasam Sammuya chapamajahat pramadottamasta Yasyendriyam vimatitum Kuakir nasheku. Anyone want to recite? Hare Krishna.
Natre, Prabhu.
Okay.
Udama Bawal Pisunamala Valgu Hasa Vrindaya Valoka Nihato Madanamo Yasam Samyuya Chapam Ajat Pranadotam Sta Yas Yendrayam Vimatim Kuham Air Naseko.
Okay, anyone else?
Sir, I try.
Okay.
Udama bhava pisunamala valguasa virada valoga nihatto madano piyasa samhum ya chapa ajat pramadottamasta yas yendriam vimati kuhakirna sekum. Hare
Okay.
Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. Okay,
Thank you,
this
sir.
is quite a difficult meter. It's meter 14. But we have covered all the meters in our one of our Friday sessions in July. So you all can there's a separate playlist also, shloka recitation. in our channel, so you all can even practice by looking at that playlist videos. Now the synonyms: Uddama, very grave; Bhava, expression; Vishuna, exciting; Amala, spotless; Valguhasa, beautiful, smiling; Rida, corner of the eye; Avaloka, looking; Niyata, conquered; Madana, Cupid or Amadana, the greatly tolerant Shiva; Api, also; Yasam, whose; Sammuhya, being overpowered by; Chapam, bows; Ajahat, gave up; Pramada, woman who maddens; Uttama, of high grade; Ta, all; Yasya, whose; Indriyam, senses; Vimatitum, to perturb; Huake, by magical feats; Na, never; Sheku, was able. Although the queen's beautiful smiles and furtive glances were all spotless and exciting, and although they could conquer Cupid himself by making him give up his bow in frustration, and although even the tolerant Shiva could fall victim to them, still, despite all their magical feats and attractions, they could not agitate the senses of the Lord. So in the previous verses, we have been seeing descriptions about how the queens of Dwaraka, the 16,000 queens, they were reacting when Lord Krishna arrived in Dwaraka. They were very excited, but still they maintained their shyness. So even those expressions by those queens, they were so attractive to the point of even attracting Cupid himself. There's a expression or something like a title given to Radharani. She's known as Madana Mohini, the one who could attract the attractor of Cupid. The Supreme Lord is so powerful that even Cupid or Kamadev, he himself gets attracted to the Supreme Lord. But Radharani is even more attractive, that she attracts the all attractive. However, this should not be viewed from the mundane perspective, because the Supreme Lord himself, he is known as Atmarama. He does not need to satisfy himself from external pleasures, because even the word Krishna itself means the all attractive one. So although the expressions by the queens of Dwaraka, they were so attractive to the point of even conquering Cupid himself or even Lord Shiva, still it would never agitate the Supreme Lord, though he was their husband. So he was never agitated by such pleasures. Unlike us, the fallen souls, we are always agitated, and we are always looking for material sense pleasures. Even in the Gita, chapter 2, in 2.62 and 2.63, there's a description about the 8 steps which lead towards complete destruction. Why we are so fallible, especially us, the conditioned souls, why we are so fallible in this material world. So in Gita 2.62 and 63, it is stated, Dhyayato Vishyan Pumsam, Sangateshu Pajayate, Sangat Sanjayate Kamat, Kama Krodho Abhijayate, Krodhat Bhavati Sammoha, Sammoha Smriti Viprama, Smriti Vipramshat Bhuti Nasho, Bhuti Nashat Pranashyati. So in those 2 verses, there are 4 lines in each verse. So each line tells about the something like a degraded progression towards complete destruction. Because in 2.62, there are 4 lines, and also in 2.63, there are 4 lines. So there are like 8 steps towards complete destruction. The verse in 2.63 ends with Buddhi Nashat Pranashyati. When intelligence is lost, it leads to complete destruction. So it all starts from Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsam. We, the conditioned souls, we are always agitated by sense pleasures. Our senses, our material senses, are always looking for material sense pleasures. So that is the starting point, the initial spark, which causes, which is the cause for all our problems. That is the reason why we are trapped in this material world as conditioned souls. If we are able to overcome that, we can completely escape total destruction. Because when our senses get agitated looking for material sense pleasures, Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsam, when our senses contemplate on sense objects looking for sense pleasures, Sangateshu Upachayate, it leads to attachment. Sangat Sanjayate Kamat, then attachment leads to lust, meaning lust here does not necessarily mean that we are looking for sexual pleasures. Even when we are too attached to any sense object, it could be even like a car maybe, or any other objects like jewelry. So all these attachments, when they go beyond a certain level, it leads to lust. Then when that lust is unfulfilled, it leads to anger. Then it continues to the next levels until it leads to total destruction. We get bewildered, our mind gets bewildered, then we are unable to focus on things that really matter, because this human form of life is the most precious opportunity for us to engage in spiritual inquiry and devotional service. However, due to the influence of Maya, and also when we ourselves, when we are unable to control our senses, we contemplate on sense objects, and it leads to attachment towards things which do not really matter, like material wealth. Whatever material wealth that we accumulate in this life, once we have to leave this body, it's going to serve no purpose for us. So the only wealth that matters is spiritual wealth. How much spiritual inquiry do we do, and how much devotional service do we perform? Only when we engage in spiritual inquiry, then we'll be able to know what is the true purpose of this human form of life that we have obtained. But on the contrary, we are always obsessed with material sense pleasures, and as a result, we waste our precious human form of life in the things that do not really matter. So ultimately, it leads to complete destruction. However, the Supreme Lord is, though he also appeared like a normal human being, externally, his external appearance, but Krishna himself says in Gita 4.9 that Janma Karma Chame Divyam Em Yo Veti Tatvata Tyakva Deyam Punarjanma Neti Mameti Sho Arjuna. Those who know the transcendental nature of Krishna's appearance and his activities, only they are qualified to go back to Godhead, to the spiritual world. Also in 9.11, Krishna says, Avajanati Mamuda Manushim Tanuashlitam Parambhama Jananto Mamuta Maheshwaram. Only fools regard him as a normal human being. So when we view these aspects of the Supreme Lord, just because he had 16,000 wives, so if we view that from the mundane perspective, we won't be able to understand the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord's appearance and activities. So we may not be able to get qualified to go back to Godhead, but we remain fools in this material world. Then we'll be forced to take birth in many other material bodies. So from our present fallible condition of being conditioned souls, if we even if we get liberated, we become infallible souls in the spiritual world. However, the Supreme Lord is always one step beyond even the infallible souls. This has been mentioned in Gita chapter 15, 15.16 to 15.18. There are 3 verses which talk about the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. Chapter 15 itself, we have actually covered chapter 15, Purushottam Yoga, in 2 sessions during the Purushottam month in August. So in that chapter, it talks about the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. The descriptions explain about how the spiritual abode is completely different from this material world. And in those 3 verses, 15.16 to 15.18, the descriptions talk about how the Supreme Lord is transcendental, like he is beyond both the fallible and infallible living entities. In those 3 verses, the description explain about the meaning of fallible living entities. We are the fallible living entities because we are the conditioned souls trapped in this material world. But those who get liberated to the spiritual world, those who enter the Vaikuntha planets or even Goloka Vrindavana, they are the infallible souls. But even such liberated infallible souls, they also continue to be controlled by the Supreme Lord. So these descriptions are also there in the Upanishads, like Katha Upanishad, because in Katha Upanishad, it talks about the conversation between Yamaraj and Ramin boy Nachiketa. So he keeps inquiring from Yamaraj about what happens to the living entities, the soul, after death. So Yamaraj gives all the descriptions, and in the conclusion, it becomes clear that the Supreme Lord continues to control and guide even the liberated souls. So even such liberated souls, they are known as the infallible living entities. Compared to us, the fallible living entities in this material world, even the liberated souls, they become infallible living entities in the spiritual world. However, the Supreme Lord is transcendental. He is beyond both the fallible and infallible. So even the liberated souls in the spiritual world, they are still controlled by the Supreme Lord, who is transcendental. So that is the true nature of the Supreme Lord. He is transcendental. Even to understand the meaning of transcendence, that itself is a huge topic, because it is to understand what is transcendental, we should first understand what is not transcendental. So that's why we have the descriptions related to the material modes of nature. There's one chapter in Gita, chapter 14. Though the descriptions about the 3 modes of material nature are given in chapter 14, but references to the 3 modes are actually there throughout the Gita in almost all the chapters. It actually starts from as early as the 2nd chapter, and even in the last chapter, in chapter 18, there are further explanations about many other aspects related to the material modes of nature, like work in the 3 modes, knowledge in the 3 modes, and happiness in the 3 modes. So only if we have proper understanding about these 3 modes of material nature, then we can understand the meaning of transcendence. Because the one who is able to transcend the 3 modes, only that person can achieve transcendence. So only that state will enable us to, will actually make us qualified to enter the spiritual world. So the Supreme Lord is transcendental. His senses are transcendental, and therefore nothing could agitate the senses of the Supreme Lord. So even when the queens of Dwaraka were making such attractive expressions, but the Supreme Lord was never agitated. His senses, his transcendental senses, were never agitated. The Supreme Lord's senses are always transcendental, unlike us. Since we are trapped in this material body, our senses are all material and we are always agitated by the sense objects around us. Purport: the path of salvation or the path going back to Godhead always forbids the association of women, and the complete Sanātana-dharma or Varnashrama-dharma scheme forbids or restricts association with women. How then can one be accepted as the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is addicted to more than 16,000 wives? This question may be relevantly raised by inquisitive persons really anxious to know about the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. We have even seen much in-depth explanations regarding how the queens of Dwaraka became the wives of Lord Krishna, and why it is wrong to view this relationship from the mundane perspective. So we have actually seen a lot of explanations from the previous verses also, because to understand these transcendental topics, there are many other aspects of the Supreme Lord which we need to understand, like what is the meaning of Supreme Personality of Godhead? What is the meaning of the word Bhagavan? So we have seen many explanations related to those aspects. So that's why it is wrong to compare these transcendental relationships between the Supreme Lord and the queens of Dwaraka from the mundane perspective. Because simply if we understand the meaning of Bhagavan, that itself should suffice to make us understand these transcendental topics. However, it is very easy for many self-proclaimed intellectuals to make all sorts of baseless claims and allegations without reading from the authentic scriptures, like even regarding Sanātana-dharma or Varnashrama-dharma. Many people who don't even know how many chapters and verses are there in the Bhagavad Gita, they tend to become self-proclaimed intellectuals, and they tend to comment about everything without reading from the authentic scriptures or the bona fide acharyas commentaries. For example, what is meant by Sanātana-dharma, or what is the meaning of the word dharma itself? Because we can see from here that the word Sanātana-dharma consists of two keywords, Sanatana and Dharma. So it is a huge topic. However, many fools who don't even know how many chapters and verses are there in the Bhagavad Gita, they tend to make all sorts of baseless claims and allegations. For example, recently there was a rogue politician in Tamil Nadu. He is actually a minister in the Tamil Nadu state government. And he is also, actually, he is the one who is controlling the entire Tamil film industry. So that idiot made some ridiculous comments about Sanātana-dharma without even knowing about the meaning of Sanatana. These fools, they don't even know what is the meaning of Sanatana, and they don't even know what is the meaning of Dharma. Only if they read the authentic scriptures and the commentaries by bona fide acharyas, only then they can understand. But these semi-literate or illiterate idiots, they only know how to make baseless claims just for political purposes. So this idiot who made that remark, he's the one who is controlling the entire Tamil film industry, and he even acted in one movie just a few months back. So in that movie, he was acting in the role of a swineherd, but in real life, he is not even qualified to be a swineherd. Without his family background, he is nothing. So that idiot made some remarks about eradicating Sanātana-dharma, but these fools don't even know what is the meaning of Sanatan. If we read bona fide commentaries by our acharyas, for example, even in Bhagavad Gita as it is, for those who have the book, you all can refer to page number 15 in the last, starting from the last paragraph in the introduction section. From that part itself, Srila Prabhupada gives a very detailed explanation about the meaning of Sanātana-dharma. Even to understand the meaning of the word Sanatan, that itself is a huge topic. So in the introduction section of Bhagavad Gita as it is, Prabhupada has actually given the explanation. Okay, here in chapter 8 of Bhagavad Gita, starting from 8.15, where Krishna says, so in 8.15, Krishna talks about how the material world is actually Dukkalayam Ashashwatam, a place of misery which is temporary. So starting from 8.15, there are also several other verses following 8.15, where Krishna explains how this material world is considered temporary. So in verses 8.16, 17 onwards, Krishna talks about how the three lokas, the upper, middle, and lower planetary systems, how they are created and annihilated in a continuous cycle. Like when we talk about the Purusha Avatar concept, so the Mahatattva is created by Mahavishnu, who is actually a plenary expansion of the Supreme Lord Krishna. So in the Mahatattva, so many material universes, innumerable material universes emerge from the breathing of Mahavishnu in the Karna ocean. So all these material universes are controlled by Garbhodarashai Vishnu, who is the second Purusha Avatara. Then from Garbhodarashai Vishnu, Shirodakashai Vishnu expansion emerges and creates all the living entities in each material universe. So all these material universes are formed by the water bubbles which emanate from the body of Mahavishnu. But they remain for a certain period of time, meaning throughout the life of Brahma, because in each material universe, there's one Brahma who is responsible for that material universe. So towards the end of Brahma's life, that material universe is destroyed. And then again, when Mahavishnu breathes out, the material universes are created again. So this entire material creation undergoes the cycle of creation and annihilation. So this is what Krishna explains in verses 8.16 to 8.19. Even in verse 8.17, Krishna explains about the life of Brahma. And even Brahma himself, he is the topmost Jiva Tattva, the topmost living entity, but still even he has to die. We have seen in many of our Friday sessions about the duration of Brahma's life, the calculation about how the 1 day period of Brahma is calculated and how long he lives. He lives for 100 years according to his calendar, but when it's converted to our Earth years, he lives for 311 trillion and 40 billion years. But after that period of time, even Brahma has to die. So that's why Krishna starts to explain in 8.15 about how this material creation is Dukkalayam, because even Brahma has to undergo the continuous cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. and even he has to die after 311 trillion years. But in verses 8.20 and 21, Krishna talks about the spiritual sky, which is Sanatana, the Sanatana spiritual sky. First, Krishna explains about the material creation, the material universes, how they are created and annihilated again and again, followed by explanation about the spiritual sky. So that spiritual sky is described as Sanatana sky because it is eternal. It does not undergo creation and annihilation repeatedly like the material creation. The spiritual creation is eternal. It never undergoes any destruction. So that eternal spiritual sky, it is also described as Yad Tad-dhamma Paramamama, the ultimate abode. So this portion of the verse, it appears in Gita 8.21 and also in 15.6. Krishna explains about the spiritual abode in the spiritual sky as Tad-dhamma Paramamama. That is my supreme abode. So the supreme abode, the spiritual world, never undergoes repeated creation and annihilation. It exists eternally. So that is the meaning of Sanatana. Sanatana itself means eternal. It does not undergo neither creation nor destruction. So only fools who don't even understand the meaning of Sanatana, they talk about eradication of Sanātana-dharma. In this material world, we find that everything is temporary. It comes into being, stays for some time, produces some byproducts, dwindles, and then vanishes. That is the law of the material world. Whether we use as an example, this body, a piece of fruit or anything, everything that exists in this material world is will be destroyed in due course of time, because the basic ingredients for the creation of the material creation, the 24 elements, they are all material. This material world appears to be alive because we are occupying this material world. We actually belong to the superior spiritual energy of the Supreme Lord. The two types of energy of the Supreme Lord, it's the para prakriti and apara prakriti. It is either superior or inferior. So we, as part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we are actually spirit souls. We are not this body, we are spirit souls. That is our original identity. So that is why we belong to the we originally belong to the superior spiritual energy of the Supreme Lord. But since we are trapped in this material body, our current position is that we are like in between the superior spiritual energy and the inferior material energy. This material world belongs to the apara prakriti or inferior material energy. So since we are trapped in this material world, we are like in between. Our original identity is that we are part of the superior spiritual energy. But since we are encaged, our spirit soul is encaged within this destructible material body. So our identity is like mixed. So we are like in between. And therefore we the conditioned living entities, we are identified as the Tatastha Shakti or the conditioned souls, because we belong to the marginal energy. So we are like trapped in between. And most of the time, due to influence of Maya, Maya pulls us towards the inferior energy. But we should fight against that influence of Maya so that we can regain our association with the Supreme Lord in the superior spiritual abode. So that spiritual abode, that spiritual sky is Sanatana, eternal. everything that exists in this material world is destructible. The 24 elements of material creation, they are all destructible. And our fallen condition is such that we are actually being subjected to the influence of this inferior energy. Our original identity is that we are spirit souls and we are eternal. But we are forced to undergo birth and death because of our the transmigration of our soul, taking up all the different 84 lakh material species of bodies. The Jiva is also described as Sanatana, eternal, and the Lord is also described as Sanatana in the 11th chapter. In Gita 15.7, Krishna says, Mamayavanso Jivaloki Jiva Bhuta Sanatana Manashasthandriyani Prakrishtani Karshati. So Krishna says that the living entities are eternally fragmented parts of Krishna. Krishna is eternal, and we as his eternally fragmented parts, we are also eternal because we are the spirit soul. However, our present condition is such that we have degraded ourselves to this condition where we are trapped in this material body. Once we get liberated from this material body, and if we enter the spiritual world, we do not have to enter, we do not have to take up any other material body. We will actually regain our original transcendental body, which is not subject to destruction. We have an intimate relationship with the Lord, and because we are all qualitatively one, the Sanātana-dharma or sky, the Sanatana Supreme Personality, and the Sanatana living entities. The whole purpose of Bhagavad Gita is to revive our Sanatana occupation or Sanātana-dharma. So here Prabhupada mentioned about Sanātana-dharma, the eternal abode. As mentioned earlier, the spiritual world is eternal. It is never subject to destruction. Unlike the material world, it goes through cycles of creation and annihilation. So that spiritual abode is actually our original abode, because we ourselves are also the Sanatana living entities. The Jiva is also Sanatana, and therefore our original abode, our original residence is also in the spiritual world, but we ourselves have degraded ourselves to this position in this material world. So the whole purpose of this human form of life, not just the human form, even the demigods and even Brahma himself, they are all engaged in devotional service to revive the Sanatana occupation or Sanātana-dharma, which is the eternal occupation of the living entity. So what is the eternal occupation of the living entity? We as part and parcels of the Supreme Lord, our eternal dharma, our Sanātana-dharma is to satisfy the Supreme Lord. We should always be engaged in the service of satisfying the senses of the Supreme Lord. However, we have degraded ourselves to this position because we wanted to satisfy our material desires. That's why the Supreme Lord created this material world for us to enjoy. But we are trapped in this degraded condition because we had no clue about how we were actually in a much more superior position in the spiritual world. So we are the ones who degraded ourselves to this position in the material world. So the purpose of this human form of life should be to engage in spiritual inquiry and develop devotional service so that we can revive our Sanatana occupation or Sanātana-dharma. We are temporarily engaged in different activities, but all of these activities can be purified when we give up all these temporary activities and then take up the activities which are prescribed by the Supreme Lord. That is called our pure life. So as long as we try to satisfy our material desires, we can never feel satisfied because we ourselves are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. There's a verse from the 4th canto, 4:31:14, where Narada Muni is actually giving instructions to the Prachetas. In that verse, Narada Muni says, Yata Tarur Mula Nisheshanaya Tripyanti Tatskanda Bhujo Pashaka Pranopara Chaitendranam Tataiva Sauranam Achyuteja. Just like how watering the roots of a tree nourishes the entire tree, and just like how supplying food to the stomach nourishes the entire body, similarly, worshipping Achyuta satisfies all the demigods. So this was spoken by Narada Muni in 4:31:14 in his instructions to the Prachetas. So what we can understand from there is that all the living entities, including the demigods who are part of this material world, even they can be satisfied when we worship the Supreme Lord. So even to satisfy the demigods, we need to worship the Supreme Lord. So we ourselves, who are also part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we ourselves can also be satisfied only when we think about how we can engage our senses in service, in devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So only when we are engaged in devotional service, we can satisfy our senses also, because that is our original constitutional position as the Sanatana Jivas. The Supreme Lord and his transcendental abode are both Sanatana, as are the living entities, and the combined association of the Supreme Lord and the living entities in the Sanatana abode is the perfection of human life. The Lord is very kind to the living entities because they are his sons. Lord Krishna declares in Bhagavad Gita, Sarve Yonisu Kaunteya Murtya Sambhavantiya. This is from Gita 14.3, from chapter 14, where Krishna says, Aham Bija Pratapita, I am the father of all. Of course, there are all types of living entities according to their various karmas, but here the Lord claims that he is the father of all of them. Similarly, in Gita 15.7, Krishna says, Mame also Jivaloke, Jiv Bhuta Sanatana. The subject matters of the Bhagavad Gita deal with Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, Karma. The word Jiva refers to living entities. It does not merely refer to human beings. We who have got this precious human form of life, we are able to engage in spiritual inquiry, and we can develop devotional service to towards the Supreme Lord with this human consciousness. But even all other forms of life, like when we look at the 84 lakh species, Jalaja Navalakshani, Stavaram Lakshvimshati, Timeo Rutra Sankhya, Pakshinam Dasalakshanam, Trimsha Lakshani Pasava, Chatur Lakshani Manushaha. Jalaja Navalakshani, 9 lakh aquatics, Stavaram Lakshvimshati, 20 lakh plants and non-moving entities, Krimio Rutra Sankyaha, germs and insects, 11 lakh, Pakshinam Dasalakshanam, birds, 10 lakhs, Trimsha Lakshani Pasava. Pashus in Sanskrit refers to the four-legged animals generally. So there are 30 lakh animal species, and Chatur Lakshani Manusha, 4 lakh human species. So that's how we get the 84 lakh species of material bodies. We are different from other living entities in the sense that we are occupying different material bodies. Even all the other living entities, they occupy these 84 lakh types of material bodies, and that is what differentiates us from them. But we are all equal in the sense that we are all living entities. We are all eternal jivas. We are all part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. So even the animals who are also spirit souls, they have just occupied the material body of animals in this birth. So even the animals, they are also part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. They are also the eternal jivas. So the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, as explained by the Supreme Lord Krishna, they actually apply to all living entities. So that's why the Sanātana-dharma of all living entities is non-sectarian. It is completely foolish to compare Sanātana-dharma to other religions which are sectarian, because the concept of religion only applies to human beings. But Sanātana-dharma talks about all living entities. So idiots who don't even know these basic concepts, they talk nonsense for their political purposes. The Supreme Lord and his transcendental abode are both Sanatana and as are the living entities. And the combined association of the Supreme Lord are the living entities in the Sanatana abode is the perfection of human life. We have got this human form of life to revive our eternal association. Only with this human consciousness, we are in a very advantageous position, even compared to the demigods, because though we are in this middle planet, simply by engaging in devotional service, we can elevate ourselves to the spiritual world. Though the demigods are there in the upper planetary systems, even they have to work even harder to elevate themselves. But we, as human beings, being in this middle planet, we can even elevate ourselves from here itself. So, despite being born in this Kali Yuga, we still have many advantages to liberate ourselves to the spiritual world. Only if we truly understand what is our true identity as the Sanatana Jivas, and we also have to utilize this opportunity to revive our Sanātana-dharma, our eternal occupation. And this Sanātana-dharma, the eternal occupation of Jivas, it applies to all living entities, not just human beings. So that's why it is absolutely ridiculous to compare Sanātana-dharma with other religions. Sanātana-dharma is non-sectarian. We who have got this human form of life, we are able to revive our, using this human consciousness, we can actually revive our original position by engaging, by being engaged in devotional service. The Supreme Lord claims that he is the father of all living entities. Therefore, the Lord descends to reclaim all of these fallen conditioned souls to call them back to Sanatana eternal sky, so that the Sanatana living entities may regain their eternal Sanatana positions in the eternal association with the Lord. The Lord comes himself in different incarnations, or he sends his confidential servants as sons or his associates or acharyas to reclaim the conditioned souls. Even after the departure of Lord Krishna in Dwapara Yuga, he even appeared in Kali Yuga as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with all his eternal companions. And even after his departure, the line of disciplic succession, the entire parampara, through them, we are still able to gain this knowledge. So the many empowered acharyas like Srila Prabhupada and our entire parampara, they all have been empowered by the Supreme Lord to help the Supreme Lord in his mission of reclaiming the conditioned souls. Therefore, Sanātana-dharma does not refer to any sectarian process of religion. This is the basic reason why we should not compare dharma with religion. It is the eternal function of the eternal living entities, not just human beings, to all living entities in relationship with the eternal Supreme Lord. Sanātana-dharma refers, as stated previously, to the eternal occupation of the living entity, of all living entities, not just human beings. Sripad Ramanujacharya has explained the word Sanatana as that which has neither beginning nor end. So when we speak of Sanātana-dharma, we must take it for granted on the authority of Sripad Ramanujacharya that it has neither beginning nor end. That is why many of the so-called scholars, so-called celebrated historians, even they are not able to give any date for our so-called Hindu religion. The Hindu religion is often equated to Sanātana-dharma. However, none of the so-called celebrated historians, they are able to give any date for Sanātana-dharma, unlike other religions, because Sanātana-dharma is eternal. It exists eternally. But fools who don't even know this basic meaning of the word Sanatana, they are the ones who talk about eradication of Sanātana-dharma. The English word religion is a little different from Sanātana-dharma. Religion conveys the idea of faith, and faith may change. One may have faith in a particular process, and he may change this faith and adopt another. But Sanātana-dharma refers to that activity which cannot be changed. So Sanātana-dharma is not about how many people we get to convert, because those who convert to a particular religion today, they may convert back or they may revert to their original religion anytime. But Sanātana-dharma is eternal. It cannot be separated from our original identity. We as the eternal jivas, we have our Sanātana-dharma, which is eternal. So that identity can never be taken away. Any person can change his religion on any application form, but the Sanātana-dharma of living entities never change. For instance, liquidity cannot be taken from water, nor can heat be taken from fire. Liquid, water in the form of liquid, is required for us to quench our thirst. We cannot quench our thirst simply by swallowing ice cubes. Though ice cubes are also formed using water, only when water is in the form of liquid, it is able to quench our thirst. When it loses its identity, when water from the state of liquid, when it becomes solid, then it cannot quench our thirst. We cannot simply swallow ice cubes to quench our thirst. So the true value for water can be realized only when it is in its original liquid form. Only then it can be used to quench our thirst. Similarly, heat cannot be taken from fire. If that is done, then fire itself loses its utility. Similarly, the eternal function of the eternal living entity cannot be taken from the living entity. So whenever we try to become something that we are not, we are meant to be eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord. But when we decided to be enjoyers and controllers in our own right, that is when all the problems started. That is why we had to come to this material world, and we are now suffering in this condition as conditioned souls. So we can satisfy ourselves only when we act according to our original identity. We should serve the Supreme Lord, and we should always look at how we can satisfy his senses. But we became conditioned souls because of our material desires. We wanted to satisfy our material desires through our material senses. That's why we are now encaged in this material body, and we are suffering in the cycles of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. So when the original identity is taken away, like from being the original eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord's superior spiritual energy, we degraded ourselves to this condition of being part of the material energy, of being part of the material world. So that's why we are suffering. So whenever the original aspect of our identity is taken away, then we also become useless, like ice cubes. Just like the ice cubes cannot be used to quench our thirst, similarly, we as conditioned souls, we ourselves are suffering no matter how hard we try to satisfy our material desires. So Sanātana-dharma is eternally integral with the living entity. When we speak of Sanātana-dharma, therefore you must take it for granted on the authority of Srimad Ramanujacharya that it has neither beginning nor end. Only fools who don't understand this basic concept, they talk about eradication of Sanātana-dharma. When we speak of Sanātana-dharma, therefore we must take it for granted on the authority of Srimad Ramanujacharya that it has neither beginning nor end. That which has neither beginning nor end must not be sectarian, for it cannot be limited by any boundaries. So Sanātana-dharma does not apply to human beings alone. Religion is applicable only to human beings. Sanātana-dharma applies to all living entities. It is the eternal occupation of all living entities. Those belonging to some sectarian faith will wrongly consider that Sanātana-dharma is also sectarian. But if we go deeply into the matter and consider it in the light of modern science, it is possible for us to see that Sanātana-dharma is the business of all the people of the world, not just people, all the living entities in this material universe. So to understand these concepts, we have to study the commentary of bona fide acharyas like Srila Prabhupada. Only those illiterate idiots who don't study from authentic sources, only those idiots blabber all sorts of nonsense for their political purposes. Non-Sanatana religious faith may have some beginning in the annals of human history, but there is no beginning to the history of Sanātana-dharma. That is why none of the so-called celebrated historians are able to give any date for Sanātana-dharma, but still they try to equate it to other religions. Thus, they themselves expose their foolishness. Insofar as the living entities are concerned, the authoritative Shastras state that the living entity has neither birth nor death. In Gita 2.20, this is stated about how the living entity, when we talk about living entity, we are actually referring to the spirit soul. So not just human beings, all the living entities, they have neither birth nor death. This process, which appears to be birth and death, it is just the process of the transmigration of the soul. When the spirit soul enters a new body, when it takes up a new material body, that appears to be birth. Then when the spirit soul leaves that body, then it appears to be death. But the spirit soul itself is not born, nor does it die, because spirit soul is eternal, since it's part and parcel of the eternal Supreme Lord. So even we as spirit souls, we are also eternal in our original identity. In the Gita, it is stated that the living entity is never born and he never dies. He is eternal and indestructible, and he continues to live after the destruction of his temporary material body. In reference to the concept of Sanātana-dharma, we must try to understand the concept of religion from the Sanskrit root meaning of the word. Dharma refers to that which is constantly existing with a particular object. As mentioned earlier, only when water is in the liquid form, it can be used to quench our thirst. When it is converted to a solid form in the form of ice cubes, we cannot swallow ice cubes to quench our thirst. That water loses its purpose. So when the true dharma of any living entity is taken away, because like in the case of us as conditioned souls, our original identity is that we are Sanatana Jivas, and we are meant to engage in devotional service to satisfy the senses of the Supreme Lord. Only when the Supreme Lord is satisfied, then automatically we ourselves, who are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we will also be satisfied. But we deviated from our original dharma due to material desires. We wanted to be enjoyers and controllers, and that's why we are trapped in this material world. Once we successfully revive our Sanātana-dharma, then we will be able to qualify ourselves to enter the spiritual world and regain our eternal association with the Supreme Lord. So if we deviate from our dharma, then we are rendered as completely useless and in a very helpless condition. Like in our present condition, we are trapped in this material world as conditioned souls, and we are always trying to satisfy our material senses. But no matter how much we try, we can never satisfy our material desires through our material senses. It is just not possible, because we have deviated from our original dharma, from our original Sanātana-dharma. And the degradation in Kali Yuga is such that so many idiots don't even know the meaning of Sanatana or Dharma, but they talk all sorts of nonsense just because they are able to win elections using their family background. So we must try to understand the concept of religion from the Sanskrit root meaning of the word. Dharma refers to that which is constantly existing with a particular object. we conclude that there is heat and light along with the fire. Without heat and light, there is no meaning to the word fire. Similarly, we must discover the essential part of the living being, that part which is his constant companion. That constant companion is his eternal quality, and that eternal quality is his eternal religion. So that's what Sanātana-dharma is all about. The Sanātana-dharma is applicable to all living entities, and it can never be separated from the living entities. At present, for conditioned souls, our Sanātana-dharma is like dormant because we are unable to actually regain our eternal association with the Supreme Lord. Only through the process of Krishna consciousness, we can understand our Sanātana-dharma. No matter how much material wealth we accumulate in this life, it all becomes useless once we leave this body. We cannot enjoy any of our material wealth once we leave this body. We need this current material body to enjoy whatever wealth we have accumulated. But we know that we can never escape from the clutches of death, and it can come any moment. So we have to understand what true wealth really is. Only our Sanātana-dharma will help us to accumulate true wealth. Only by being engaged in our Sanātana-dharma and by being engaged in devotional service, we can accumulate true wealth, which would transcend even this transmigration of the soul. Even in Gita 2.40, it has been mentioned that the biggest danger in our life, especially for us as human beings, is to deviate from our dharma, because it leads to degradation. For us who have gained this human form of life, if we deviate from our dharma, if we are not even able to know what is our dharma, then there's no chance for us to be engaged in any form of spiritual inquiry or devotional service. Only by knowing these basic concepts, by studying the commentaries of bona fide acharyas, only then we can understand these basic concepts, and we can progress further in our devotional service. Whatever devotional service that we perform, it would help us to progress further, even in our next lives. This has been explained by Krishna in chapter 6, towards the end of chapter 6, in Dhyana Yoga. Arjuna asked Krishna about what happens to the unsuccessful yogi. Even if we are engaged in devotional service in this life, and if we meet any untimely death, so what happens to whatever devotional service that we have performed? So this question was asked by Arjuna to Krishna about what happens to the unsuccessful yogi whose spiritual practice is not complete. To which Krishna replies that for such people, they still get another human form of life in ideal conditions. Like it could be like a birth in a Brahmana family. We get to be born in a Brahmana family where we can continue our spiritual practice from where we left. So even this has been seen from the activities of Maharaj Bharat, when he was actually forced to be degraded to the life of a baby deer. But whatever piety which he has been accumulating, it helped him to progress further in his future lives. So similarly, the only true wealth is the wealth that we accumulate by being engaged in devotional service. None of the material wealth that we accumulate is going to come with us forever. So that's why it is important for us to completely understand our original identity as Sanatana Jivas. As Sanatana Jivas, we have our Sanatana Dharma, which is all about being engaged in Krishna consciousness to perform devotional service to satisfy the Supreme Lord. Only that could liberate us from this incessant cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. So I'll stop here for today. We'll continue with the remainder of the purport for this verse. So as we can see, even when we talk about Sanātana-dharma alone, even the word Sanatana itself, it has a very deep meaning. Even to understand the word dharma, even that also has a very in-depth meaning. But many idiots who know nothing about this, they talk all sorts of nonsense for their political purposes. So next week we'll continue with the remainder of the purport. Thanks for attending today's session. So any questions or comments?
No, Prabhu.
Okay. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Krishna Prabhu.
Okay.